Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
The volcano blows up. Peak lost 2,300 feet in eruption. Death toll reaches 17. Volcano blows debris 20,000 feet. The Big Bang. Eruption decapitates St. Helens. The sky is falling on Washington. Hundreds flee Mount St. Helens. People flocked to the newsstand in the days following the eruption, consuming every word of every article they could get their eyes on. The story for those far away was fascinating, something to talk about. For those near the mountain, the moments following the eruption were terrifying, for it was far bigger than anticipated. And those on the mountain? Well, their experience was something we will never understand. Because when all was said and done, the eruption of Mount St. Helens buried part of the mountain under the landscape she took off the top. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello, I am your host, Kayla. Welcome back to the last week of October. On Friday, which is Halloween, there is going to be a special bonus episode being released. The Darkcast crew kind of got together and everybody set up a 5 to 15 minute episode and we compiled them all together, and that is what is going to be released on Friday. So you're going to get to hear from a whole bunch of people, including myself. And if you are interested, the next week's episode, I guess I should say, is a subscriber only episode. We are going to be talking about a man who rode his bike to climb Mount Everest. And I think it's really cool. He's got a really interesting life and it's been really a lot of fun researching him. So if you are interested in that, head over to either Patreon or Apple or Spotify subscriptions. The link will be in the episode description here for Patreon. And also, as a quick reminder, there is still merch available. One of those designs will no longer be available starting January 1st. It is clearly marked as limited edition, so be sure to grab yours before you can't get it again. And then also before long, I'm going to be putting up a post on both Instagram and Patreon and probably Facebook as well, asking you to give me some nonprofits and charities that you would like to see this year's money be donated to. And so I would love for all sorts of input on that. I had great responses last year and I'm looking forward to see what you all want to support this year. Now, for this episode, before we really get into it, I have to tell you that I have been holding off on doing this for a very long time. It is very, very long overdue. If you have listened to other episodes, you have likely heard me say that I love Mount Rainier. And while the story is not about Rainier, the surrounding area of Rainier, which includes Mount St. Helens, I am very drawn to. The mountains are about an hour-and-a-half drive away from each other, or as the crow flies, it's about 50 miles. Similarly, both mountains stand far taller than anything around them, making it easy to point out on a clear day, especially because there are one of only a few that maintain snow at its peak year-round. The Pacific Northwest as a whole is just really captivating to me, not only in its beauty, but also its very unique ecosystem that is there, but also the history that is here as well. And today's episode could very well be something that many of you have lived through. Some of you may even remember these events happening. For on May 18th, 1980 at 9:15 a.m., Mount St. Helens erupted. Mount St. Helens is one of several active volcanoes in the Cascade Range that runs through western Washington. Standing tall between Mount Rainier and Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens stood 9,677 feet in elevation prior to the May 18th eruption. Sitting aside the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, Mount St. Helens has an active history. As far as volcanoes go, if a volcano has had an eruption in the past 10,000 years, it is considered active. And they are classified further as either dormant or extinct, where dormant just means that they are not currently erupting, and extinct means that they have not erupted in the past 10,000 years, and it is not suspected to erupt again. Mount St. Helens has erupted some 40 times or more since the end of the Ice Age nearly 12,000 years ago. As far as volcanoes go, it is quite young. At about 40,000 years old, the full history of its eruptions and evolution is, of course, hard to capture. Currently, the volcano is not erupting, but does have a normal level of background activity indicating that an eruption could start at any time. While many of the eruptions occurred far before we can fathom, the indigenous and cultural history of this area paint a good picture of what this mountain has been known for. The area is home to the Cowlitz tribe and the Yakama Nation, and it has been called by the Cowlitz Lowet Latla, which translates to smoker, while other names such as Luwalaklo have translated into Fire Mountain. Mount St. Helens was surveyed in the 1700s by George Vancouver, who gave the mountain its current name after his friend Baron St. Helens. It was then named a national monument in 1982 after its massive eruption, and then finally recognized as the National Register of Historic Places due to its significant cultural role in the tribes that have called this area home far before we have. In all, 1.5 million acres are protected, which includes Mount St. Helens, Spirit Lake, Mount Adams, Mount Margaret, and the Goat Rock Wilderness area. But of course, like many, many areas of the world, the beauty pulled people in, and that is exactly what led Harry Truman and the Moore family to being here in 1980. We are first going to focus on Harry here for at least the first part of the story, and I promise we will get to the Moore family, and I don't want you to think that they're kind of an afterthought as we go through the story. It's just the Harry Truman's part of the story is kind of like the before and to the eruption, and then the Moore family kind of comes in after the eruption. So we're going to be talking about both today. Harry Truman, not the president, was born in West Virginia in 1896. And while his middle name and the actual date of his birth are lost to history, I would like to remind you that at the time it was not uncommon for children to die at a young age, and many places did not have an official system for tracking births and deaths, and so because of this, many records are just incomplete. He was born to a timber family, and so when logging began to run rampant in the West, they packed up and moved in 1907. He was enlisted in World War I, learning how to fly a plane. He did some bootlegging, searched for gold in Alaska, and eventually settled down as a mechanic. He got married to a woman, ironically named Helen, and had a daughter that they named Betty, but they didn't stay settled for long. He made his way to Nevada to search for gold again and ended up finding a profession transporting liquor due to the prohibition from San Francisco to Washington. During this time, he had some run-ins that resulted in him being fearful for his life and his family's life as well, so he ended up hiding them away near the shore of Spirit Lake, which was 3,200 feet up near Mount St. Helens. He ended up running a lodge here with a grocery store and a gas station and a boathouse where people could rent boats and go out on the lake. Betty would need to attend school, and Helen was just not happy about the secluded mountains of Washington, and soon after Betty became a school child age, Helen filed for divorce. But Harry was happy here on his own. Even though the area was secluded and difficult to access much of the year, he made friends with game wardens and Park Service members and rangers, but you could tell that he had found a certain claim to this land. He would be annoyed at families and others who stayed at a nearby campground, and he just wasn't thrilled when children or elderly were around. Harry would end up getting married again to Marjorie Brown, and this wasn't exactly a healthy relationship. They got in frequent fights, and it was even witnessed that Harry would throw Marjorie into the lake when he was unhappy, and they, too, would later divorce. In 1937, Harry's entire lodge burnt to the ground when a log rolled out of the fireplace and caught a rug on fire. And this fire just spread like crazy. But this opened up the opportunity for Harry to rebuild not just the lodge, but the resort. This then opened 2 years later in 1939. For just shy of 50 years, Harry worked hard in every aspect of the resort. He was proud of what he built in this place he loved. And he would fall in love again. This time with a woman named Eddie, and this time the relationship was a good one. They were a match, and while I would love to tell you that this is a happily ever after story, this is tragedy with a view after all. Eddie passed away in 1975, likely due to a heart attack, and it was after this that Harry truly began to fall apart. So when events deep within the Earth's crust began to take shape, Harry was not one to complain. In March of 1980, a series of earthquakes began to vibrate the land, and this was a big indicator to experts that something was going to happen. But Harry just didn't believe this because, for the entire history of him being there, Mount St Helens hadn't erupted once, and he either didn't believe that it would, or maybe he hoped that it would and he could go down with the mountain that he loved to once again be with the woman he loved. On March 20th, an earthquake was picked up by a seismograph about 20 miles north of the mountain. This earthquake was a 4.1 on the Richter scale, which is a light earthquake. What you may notice with this level of an earthquake is just kind of like the loose objects around a house, like glass of water or a clock on the wall will wobble and shake around. And it didn't end here. Several earthquakes every day for the following 3 days were recorded, and then a jump. On the 23rd of March, there were 40 earthquakes detected per hour, and they were getting closer and closer to the mountain. This is a huge jump in comparison to what experts usually see, which between the years 1975 and 1980, only 44 earthquakes were recorded, meaning that what was recorded in 5 years took place in a single day. While aftershocks are common with earthquakes, especially strong ones, experts looked at the data and found that these were individual earthquakes, so the 40 does not include the aftershocks. 4 days later, on March 27th, the first visible sign of eruption occurred with hot ash blowing 7,000 feet into the air, and with it a crater formed that was about 250 feet wide and 100 feet deep. So as the eruption is occurring, the mountain is collapsing in on itself. As these plumes of ash were periodically being released into the sky, news crews began to show up, and when they learned that Harry insisted on staying where he was no matter what the mountain did, they all started wanting to interview him. National Geographic and the New York Times were two of these crews, and Harry is quoted saying that if it erupts with lava, it's not going to get me at Spirit Lake. Those geologists must know something about the inside of a mountain, but I know her contours. Besides, if I left this place, it would worry me to death. If this place is going to go, I want to go with it, 'cause if I lost it, it would kill me within a week anyways. As the tremors within the mountain grew, huge avalanches were sweeping down the slopes as magma deep within the earth was rising and the heat was coming in contact with the snow and the cold earth, and this resulted in massive releases. Police ended up setting up barriers where people were not allowed to pass in a 15-mile radius of the mountain, but the news crews kind of didn't care, and they wanted their story, and a story is exactly what Harry gave them. Despite the mountain releasing several avalanches, earthquakes rocking the ground, and the smoke rising from the mountain, news crews ignored these boundaries and would find Harry in his home. In addition to this, it's impossible to completely block off an entire mountain, so some citizens were even just going to the mountain to get a closer look at the activity. Harry is a very animated person, and he is a great storyteller. He speaks not just with his words, but with his whole body, captivating even the most stubborn. He admitted to being human, that even though he was staying there, he was scared. The earthquakes were getting stronger and furniture was moving clear across the room as they rumbled and quaked. He was very direct with his stance that he was staying on the mountain and also entertained people as they stayed at the lodge. If a story was what they were after, a story is what they would get. On April 8th, it was noticed that where there were previously 2 bulges on the Forsyth Glacier on the north face of the mountain, it had now combined into one massive bulge. This was when experts changed their mind about what was going to occur. They no longer thought it would just be an eruption, but they believed it would be a massive one. A smaller eruption released from the mountain, mostly in the form of a plume of ash rising into the air, and lasted for 6 hours, starting at about 8 a.m. and ending at 2 p.m. This was the longest eruption event yet of this current preceding eruption. The now singular bulb was estimated to be over 1,700 feet wide and penetrated as deep as 800 feet into the mountain. 2 weeks later, on April 24th, it was found that this bulge was growing in size every single day. Despite the small eruptions that were occurring semi-frequently, the bulge was now protruding outward over 300 feet. It had grown to 1 kilometer or 2/3 of a mile wide and was only getting bigger by up to 5 feet per day. But as the weeks passed, Harry truly began to believe that the mountain was just creating noise, that it would puff out some smoke like a smoker does after a long draw on a cigarette, and that would be all she wrote. And then it seemed that this is exactly what happened. Several weeks would go by where there really wasn't much happening at all. But it was during this time that people really began to evacuate the area. Nothing happened yet until May 7th, when ash again ballooned into the sky. Moderate earthquakes of magnitude 5 on the Richter scale rocked through the area, causing even those who were doubting an eruption to second-guess themselves. On May 12th, another earthquake triggered a massive avalanche to release from the north face, leaving behind a smooth and clear view of the bulge that protruded from the mountain's face. On May 17th, people who had belonged in the cabins were escorted in to do a final sweep through and grab all of their personal items that they could before they would be evacuated again. And as they passed by the lodge, they could see Harry standing on the front lawn. He had sprinklers going, and he looked like he was just taking his time with his usual spring tasks so that he could get the lodge ready for a busy summer. He had been living in the shadow of Mount St Helens for 50 years. Not only was he being stubborn about leaving, but he was also being stubborn about the potential for a major eruption, even going as far to say that if the volcano erupted, he wasn't going to be affected, because lava was not going to reach him at Spirit Lake. He truly believed that he knew the mountain better than the geologists did. But even though the geologists were telling him things, as well as the public, and giving him warnings, Harry Truman was the man on the mountain. He was the one who was living through the experience firsthand, and though he recognized that something was happening inside the mountain, he didn't believe it would erupt. Between March 20th and May 18th, just shy of 2,800 earthquakes were recorded around Mount St Helens. At 8:23 a.m. on May 18th, as another earthquake tore through the area, the bulge finally released, collapsed, and with it, the volcano erupted. As people from distant towns sat up on their roofs and watched the explosion in real time, the experience on the mountain was significantly different. Rock and gas burst from the bulge at 400 miles per hour. A chunk of the mountain a mile wide went with it. Magma, which had been expanding within Mount St Helens, was heating the rocks and creating a pressure system that unleashed the full fury of Mount St Helens. The rock, which was now thrust from the north face, was heated to 800 degrees Fahrenheit or 400 degrees Celsius. Rather than being a vertical explosion, the eruption moved in a more horizontal direction from the bulge. Ash shot 15 miles into the sky, and as all of this was happening, a lahar, or a mudflow mixed with volcanic ash and water, containing 46 billion gallons of debris, came barreling down the north face. When it reached the lower ranges of the mountain, it did not slow down as it surged into Spirit Lake, causing a tidal wave 600 feet tall. All of this happened while the earthquake was still rocking the mountain, and in all, the landslide traveled for 13 miles. The ash that bloomed into the sky covered 20,000 square acres of land, blocked out the sun, giving the morning a midnight feel. It was so dark that the streetlights that only come on in the dark were on all day long. Backing up to 8 a.m., 13 miles north of the mountain was the Moore family. Mike and Lou Moore were camping just outside of the red zone along with their 2 daughters, Bonnie, who was 4, and Tara, who was only 3 months old. They had hiked just over 2 miles to get to their camp location. From their campsite, they could not see Mount St Helens, but when they heard an odd noise and turned their attention in that direction, they could see a mound of black smoke rising into the air above the tree line. Mike picked up his camera, took a few photos, and it was during this moment that he realized that the black cloud was coming towards them. Realizing that they couldn't stay there while also recognizing that they had a 2-mile hike back out of the woods, they grabbed their daughters and what they could and started to head back towards the car. But on the way, the ash came down so heavy that they eventually couldn't see. Luckily, though, they found a small 1-room hunting cabin where they were able to get into it and seal themselves in, but ash was still finding its way through the cracks. While they stayed here, it was so dark that they couldn't see anything, and so Lou was periodically pinching Tara to make her cry so that way she would know that she was still okay. Tara was a baby, so there was no way to ask her and get a verbal response for how she was doing and if she was all right. Finally, when the sun began to peek through the ash again, Mike and Lou decided it was time to get back to their car. As they made their way, they realized that there wasn't just ash that had fallen from the sky. Trees had been uprooted, rocks and debris had been shifted, and their path in looked very different from the path that they were walking now. They had to climb over tree trunks, and they have 2 young children with them, so after 6 hours, when they only made it a half a mile, they set up their tent and settled in for another night. During the night, they could hear the volcano as it continued to erupt. The big explosion was now over, but the volcano was not done. Earthquakes continued, landslides and avalanches released, and when the morning came with the sound of helicopter blades, Mike and Lou took their chance, leaping out of their tent and waving their arms in the air. The crew in the helicopter spotted them and lowered 2 paramedics down to them, but the ash was so thick that the helicopter was unable to lower down enough to evacuate the Moors with a rope. So they had to get to a different location so that way they could land. But as you can imagine, with the amount of destruction there was, landing was nearly impossible. But finally, they found a spot. When they got to the helicopter, a little detail was finally noticed. As they were about to climb inside, the crew told Lou that she had to leave her backpack. There just wasn't room for it. And she looked at them and was like, no, my baby's in there. So she had a child-carrying styled backpack, and the paramedics had just failed to notice that there was a baby on her back. From the helicopter, the view of the landscape below them really hit home for how lucky they were. As the eruption continued throughout the day, towns as far as 300 miles away were shut down due to the ash released into the sky. Thanks to the air currents in the atmosphere, it only took 2 weeks for ash to reach every single part of the globe. As the tidal wave hit, the water surged out of Spirit Lake and it swallowed up the forest surrounding the lake, and then it slowly settled back into the low area to form the lake again. As it did so, it brought with it 1 million tree trunks and debris. It was so bad that in an initial flyover to examine the damage done by the eruption, they thought that Spirit Lake had been completely filled in and was no longer existent. Over the years, though, the trees have slowly began to sink to the bottom of Spirit Lake, making it visible once again. This eruption was not only the most deadly, it was one of the most destructive and one of the most costly volcanic eruptions ever recorded. In all, 200 square miles around the mountain were obliterated. 200 homes were destroyed, and billions of dollars worth of damage was done to towns, homes, communities, and wilderness surrounding the area. For Harry Truman, at 83 years old, he became one of 57 lives lost that day, and his final words that we know of are thanks to a radio transmission that he made where he can be heard saying, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." Of the 57 lives that were lost, 26 were never located. Most were found to have died due to asphyxiation due to the ash in the air, or being buried by the landslides, or due to the extreme heat from the eruption. Harry's Lodge is now buried beneath approximately 180 feet of debris and 90 feet of water. The lake shifted its location due to the amount of debris which landed in the lake, and it rose 200 feet. The mountain itself lost 1,314 feet in elevation, and it took 7 years before the Forest Service reopened the north face of the mountain for climbing due to the amount of destruction that occurred. Mount St Helens is an active volcano. The eruption that occurred in 1980 was the biggest we have seen to date, but there are experts who believe that when Mount St Helens blows again, because even those who doubt her power, there is a unanimous belief that she will erupt again, and those future eruptions may be even bigger. Thank you for listening. We will talk again next week, subscribers, and 2 weeks for everyone else. Have a great week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.